This is Weaving a Bookmark Part 3. We're going to start our second piece of weft. In our last session we put our first piece of weft on by tying it at the end and going over and under, over and over, and under and over and under and over and under, and doing a whole pattern all the way up to the top and tying a knot on our piece of warp string, our white warp. Here are the directions again for tying a knot. It's over the warp, over the weft, under the weft, and through the hole. Or you could do the option 2, which is the same thing, just backwards and a little bit different. So I'm going to start with number 2 actually, and I'm going to go underneath my first piece of weft with my warp, excuse me, with my orange piece of weft, and I'm going to go over my piece of warp again. So I'm going under and over. Now I'm going to go under my piece of weft. Okay, same piece of weft. Now I'm going to go over this little section of weft here and down through the hole. Okay, so there's my knot. I'm going to pull it and just kind of scrunch it down here. Now for our second piece of weft, we have to be very careful and make sure that we go over the correct pattern so that it looks right and doesn't come apart. If we look here closely, you can see that this piece of weft here is going over this warp. So we need to make the opposite pattern. We need to go underneath that one, over the next one, and underneath. So you can see we're going to do the opposite pattern as the red piece of weft here. We need to pull it underneath. And now our orange piece of weft should be the opposite pattern as our last red piece of weft. Now you start back just like we did with the red one, and you're going to do the opposite pattern. This one is coming out under the warp. We need to go back over the warp, under, over, under. So we have the same pattern. Let me cut this little tail off here so that we don't get confused about which one is which. Okay, now remember, don't cut that so short that you can't retie it if you need to, and be really careful not to cut one of your warp strings because it's really hard to fix once if you do that. So here we go, opposite pattern again, pull it through. Remember not to pull your warp string so tight that you bend this warp. Don't pull on that piece of string tightly, just leave it loose, scrunch it down, go back the opposite pattern. Okay, this one here is going underneath, so we're going to come back over the top, under, over, so that we're doing the opposite pattern. Okay, so you can see that. And just as a reminder, if you accidentally do the same pattern on your way back, let's see what happens. Here's my orange going under. If I take my shuttle under, just like that, and I follow that piece of warp back, the guess here is, make a guess, it's going to untie itself. Watch. Here's my shuttle pulling through. Notice it's the same pattern here. It's both over. I'm going to pull this, and what happens? Uh-oh, it all comes undone. So make sure that you're going back over the opposite way that you did just the last pass through. Okay, I'm going to do that. Pull it back through so I can fix it. Oops. Don't pull it too tight, Mr. Lundgren. And we're going to go back over the top now, just like we did before. We're doing the opposite pattern. So you can see this is kind of loose at the moment. Okay, but we want to make sure we're doing the right pattern. We can fix it in a minute. Okay, I just want to make sure I can illustrate the pattern. So if we go back to our original piece here where we tied our knot, it's going to go under, over, under, back around, over, under, back, over, under, and back, over, under, back, over, under, back, over. You get the picture. So now I'm just going to scrunch these down, make sure that they're nice and scrunched down well. And I'm going to end here. What I want you to do is, for yours, make sure that it is definitely an inch, a little bit more than your popsicle stick, just like we did with our red one. I'm just going to scrunch this down in the interest of making the video shorter, and I'm going to tie off my next piece. I'm going to leave myself a little tail here so I can tie that easily, and I'm going to follow, since we have my warp going, or my weft here going underneath my warp. First we're going to start with option number 2, under the warp. So I'm going to go under the warp, over the warp, okay, under my piece of weft, over this little middle part of my weft, and back down through the hole. Okay, and there's my knot, and I'm just going to kind of pull that gently so that we have our knot tied on there, and now you're done with your second piece of weft. And that ends our movie, Weaving Bookmark Part 3, second piece of weft.